A human boy took a beast's jaws to the ribs to keep an alien girl alive, and the warlord who came running watched it all and made him a son. The dust seas of Vaughn 4 came back to color before the boy did. Eli Vance had been awake since the second moonset, mocking the stables of the Crossroads outpost in the long gray hour before sunrise, and the cold of the dome floor was working its way up through the soles of his boots into the small of his back. He stopped to pull on his gloves, and the leather cracked along the seams the way it always did. 3 credits a pair. He could not afford new ones until winter rotation. He pulled them on anyway. He was 16, lean from work and not from training. With light brown hair, he cut himself with a folding knife when it got into his eyes. His face had been a softer shape once. 8 years on Vaughn 4 had drawn it tight at the jaw and along the cheekbones, and his gray eyes, the same color as his mother's, had lost the part that used to laugh easily. He did not miss it most days. He was alive, and he was working. And when you grew up in the kind of world where most of the people you started with were already gone. Alive and working was a good morning. He had been 9 when the Outer Rim Rebellion took his parents. A transport bombing on a route they should not have been on. The Frontier Mandate had paid the survivors a single grief stipend and forwarded him to the Crossroads Outpost as a ward of the colonial garrison. And the Crossroads Outpost had handed him to a stable master named Boric, who needed cheap hands more than he needed a child. Boric was not cruel. He was not kind either. He paid Eli a half credit a day in a cot in the loft above the pack beasts, and he spoke to him only when something needed lifting. Eli had stopped expecting more from him by the time he was 11. Outside the eastern dome, dawn began the slow burn that would turn the dust seas from gray to copper to red. The Crossroads Outpost was a 5-roomed trade station built on the back of a long, flat ridge, the only fixed point of human commerce within 1,000 kilometers. Humans, Terran merchants, Korath warriors, and a half-dozen smaller species traded here under a treaty held together with paper, fear, and the slow, patient pressure of mutual need. The garrison kept a small barracks at the western dome and pretended to keep order. Mostly the order kept itself because the people who came here had nowhere else to go, and they all knew what happened to the last outpost that broke its truce. He carried 2 buckets of water across the central plaza and watched a Korath caravan unload at the eastern gate, 6 wagons, olive green skin under heavy hide cloaks, the white braids of 2 female warriors, and the iron-gray short crops of 3 older males. He had seen Korath here every season since he was a boy. He had never spoken to one. Their language sounded like rocks moving underwater, and their amber eyes had vertical pupils that did not blink the way human eyes did. In the few times one of them had passed close to him in the quarters, he had felt the way his skin felt before a storm. A second convoy was rolling in behind the first, different. The wagons were draped in black cloth, and the banner at the lead wagon flew low against its pole, hidden against the dust. The warriors on foot moved in a tight diamond formation around a single covered cart at the center, and the way they walked was the way people walked when they were guarding something they could not afford to lose. Eli watched it the way he watched weather with the part of his attention he had trained to never quite turn off. And then he turned back to his buckets and his work. He was crossing the plaza for the 3rd time, the dust beginning to warm under the rising sun, when a small green hand caught his sleeve. He turned with the bucket still in his free hand and almost swung it before his eyes caught up to him. She was standing too close, and that was the first thing he registered, because Cord did not stand close to humans by accident. Cord did not stand close to anyone they did not know. The second thing he registered was that she was small, not small the way children were small the way a young woman who had not yet finished her growth was small, with the lean finesse of bone that came before the breadth of the shoulders. Olive green skin worn by the morning to a softer shade of moss. A single thick white braid down her back, tied at the end with 3 twisted strands of leather. Amber eyes are vertical pupils very wide. She was wearing a worker's coat that did not fit her, the seams loose at the shoulders, and her boots were still dust-fresh from a cart she had stepped out of less than an hour ago. She was scared. He could see that even before her hand let go of his sleeve. The fear was the kind people wore when they had run from something and were not sure if they had run far enough. "Forgive me," she said in standard English. The accent was careful, almost formal, the way a person spoke a language they had learned from a teacher who took the work seriously. "I am lost." Eli set the bucket down. His shirt was wet at the cuff where she had caught him. He looked at her and then past her, scanning the plaza for whoever she was lost from, and saw nothing. No companion, no handler, no one looking. That was wrong. Cor did not let their daughters wander a human market alone. "Lost from where?" he said, and his voice came out lower than he had meant it to, because he had not used it yet that morning. "My cousin," she said. "Tar, he brought me here. He said, 'Wait near the eastern gate.' I did. He has not come back." She glanced over her shoulder fast, and the white braid moved, and the leather charm at her wrist showed under her sleeve. 3 twisted strands, white, gray, red. He did not know what it meant. He knew it meant something. "How long?" he said. 2 hours, perhaps. "Ma, where did he say he was going?" He did not. Eli looked at her. He looked at the buckets. He looked at the long stretch of work he was already behind on, and the stable master who would dock his pay for the lost morning if the troughs were dry by the second bell. He looked back at her and at the careful set of her mouth, and at the way she had clearly not eaten that morning either. "I'm Eli," he said. She blinked. He had the impression she had been waiting for him to ask her name, and then had forgotten she had been waiting for it. "Sarah," she said. "Just Sarah, just Sarah." He let it pass. There were 100 reasons a Cor would withhold a family name in a human market, and most of them were her business and not his. He picked up the buckets and tilted his head toward the western corridor. "Walk with me," he said. "I'll finish my water run, and then I'll help you find your cousin. Don't stand here alone. Some of the people who pass through this plaza aren't people I'd leave you with." She fell beside him without a word. She walked the way someone walked who had been told from childhood how to carry herself in front of strangers. Spine straight, hands loose, eyes forward, but tracking everything in the soft edges of her vision. He noticed it without thinking, the way he noticed the weather. Halfway across the plaza, she said, "You did not ask why my cousin left me." "Not my business. Most humans would have asked." "I'm not most humans." She made a sound that might have been the start of a laugh. He glanced at her and saw the corner of her mouth pull and pull back like a thing she was not ready to let happen. Her teeth, when her lip lifted, were just slightly too sharp to be human. He watered the troughs for the eastern stable while she leaned against the post. He bought her a cup of sweetened water from the Terran stall by the painted bird seller, paid for it with a credit he did not really have, and watched her face when she drank. She had never tasted it before. He could see that she drank it the way a person drinks a thing they intend to remember. They were standing under the awning of the painted bird stall when the eastern gate began to scream. The first scream came from a Terran merchant, high and fluting, the kind of sound that meant something nearby had stopped being safe. 2 more screams answered it, human this time. Men who knew how to scream the way men screamed when they had seen something their training did not cover. A bell began to ring at the eastern dome. Then a different sound, a low rumbling cough that did not come from any throat Eli had ever heard, and the cough was followed by the dry, stuttering crack of wagon timbers giving way under something very large. Sarah went still beside him. He had time to look at her face before he looked at what was coming, and what he saw on her face was the worst thing he had seen on anyone's face in a long time. She was not surprised. She knew what was loose in the plaza. She knew what was about to come around the corner of the painted bird stall, and the look she wore was the look of a person seeing an old grief walk back into a room. "Sarah," he said. "Get behind me," she said, and it came out in Cor, And then she said it again in standard, and her voice was not a girl's voice anymore. It came around the corner. It was the size of a small horse and built nothing like one. 6 legs, 3 to a side, the front pair longer than the rear, and ending in 3-toed feet with a 4th claw curled back like a hawk's spur. Black scales hide along the spine, fading to a dark olive on the flanks, the same color as Syra's skin. The head was flat and broad, set low on a neck of corded muscle. And the mouth was not a mouth the way a wolf or a dog had a mouth. It was a quarter jaw, 4 hooked tusks, 2 upper, 2 lower, that closed in a precise 4-pointed bite. Its eyes were the color of old gold, and they did not blink. A scratch handler came around the corner 3 paces behind it, sword drawn, shouting in Korath. Eli understood none of the words. He understood the tone. The handler was not commanding. The handler was begging. The beast slowed. It turned its head with a slow consideration of a thing that had not eaten in a long time, and was deciding which thing in the plaza was the thing it would eat first. Its gaze swept past a Taurian woman who had frozen with her hand still raised toward a stall. It swept past a garrison soldier whose rifle was halfway up. It swept past the painted bird seller who was pressed flat against his own wall. It stopped on Sarah. It saw her. He could feel it see her. The animal's whole body changed in the saw. The long, heavy musculature shifting forward. The ears of those small ridge structures were ears laying flat. It made the cough again deeper this time, and the cough was the sound it made before it moved. Eli moved first. He did not think. He did not decide. He shoved Sarah with the flat of his hand hard between the shoulder blades and stepped into the place she had been standing. He turned his back on the animal. He put his arms wide. He had never owned a weapon in his life. He had a leather glove on each hand and a wet shirt cuff in a 16-year-old's body that had never been trained for anything heavier than a feed sack. He stood in the dust under a painted bird awning on a moon, 30 light years from the place he had been born. And he put himself between a Stark and the daughter of a warlord he did not yet know existed. The strike came. He had expected to be torn open. He had braced for claws. The Sothrak did not maul. It bit. It came in low and fast, and the quarter jaw closed in a single precise motion across his left shoulder and the upper ribs of his left side. And he heard from somewhere inside himself a small wet sound that was the sound of bone shifting against bone in a way bone was not meant to. The 4 tusks set themselves. The pressure was not even a pressure. It was an absolute fact. He did not fall. The animal had lifted him off his heels, and it would have been very easy to fall. Allende he did not fall, because falling meant Sira was exposed, and the part of him that was running the body in that second was not the part of him that thought. The handler arrived at a sprint and whistled 3 sharp notes. The saw rack released. Eli came down on his knees in the dust. His left arm did not work. There was a heat across his chest that he understood distantly was blood, and the heat was running down the inside of his shirt to his belt. Sarah was at his side. He could not hear what she was saying. Her green hands were red to the wrist with his blood, and her amber eyes were enormous and wet, and she was shouting at the handler in cart in a register he had not heard her use. And her voice was the kind of voice that made the handler step back and lower his eyes. Eli looked at her face, and he thought in the small, slow part of his mind that was not yet falling that her eyes were very pretty. Then the boots came, dozens of them. Korath warriors had a hard run, weapons drawn, voices climbing in a call and response that sounded like a war prayer. And at the back of the column, a figure so large the crowd parted in front of him before he had even chosen his step. He was 7 tall, give or take a hand, olive-green skin darker than Sarah's, weathered to the color of old mountain stone at the throat and the wrists, where the sun had worked on it for half a century. His head was half-shaved, the right side bare to the scalp, and tattooed with 36 small dark marks in 3 close rows. Eli did not know what the marks were. He had a guess. The hair on the left side was iron gray and braided in 3 thick lengths that fell to his collarbone. And his beard was the same gray, also braided, and his amber eyes had the same vertical pupils as his daughter's, and none of the softness. He was wearing leather and a lacquered plate the color of dried blood. He carried no weapon visible because he did not need one to be the most dangerous thing in the plaza. Eli had seen the Warlord's face on the newsfeed since he was 12 years old. The iron hand of Kelvar and Korth, unifier of the 6 green-skinned clans, victor of the Kelvari Wars. The man who had walked into the Federation Senate in the 3rd month of the truce talks and put his hand on the table and said in better standard than most of the senators spoke that his clan would honor the treaty as long as the treaty honored him, and not a day longer. He did not run to his daughter. He walked. He walked through the plaza like a man for whom no obstacle on Bourne was worth changing pace over. And the warriors in front of him peeled back in 2 waves, and the human onlookers got out of his path because human bodies understood things human minds had not yet caught up to. He came around the painted bird stall. He saw his daughter on her knees in the dust beside a human boy. He saw the blood on her hands. He saw the 4-point bite across the boy's chest and shoulder. He saw the track 5 paces back, head lowered, the handler kneeling next to it with his forehead pressed to the dust. He went to his daughter first. He did not touch her. He knelt beside her, and he looked at her face, and he asked her 1 short word in Kor. She answered him in 3. He nodded once. Then he looked at Eli. Eli was fading. The plaza had begun to sound like a thing happening in another room. The Warlord's amber eyes were the last thing in the room that was still bright, and they came in close, very close, and Karth knelt beside him in the dust and pressed 2 thick green fingers against the bleeding wound at his shoulder. He brought the fingers to his nose and smelled the blood. He pressed them to his lips briefly, his tongue at the fingertip, and then he was very still. Eli dimly thought it was a strange thing to do. The Warlord looked up at his daughter. He looked down at the boy. He looked back at his daughter. The look was a long look, and Sarah met it without flinching. And she did not look away, even when her father said, in standard for the first time very softly, "Tell me what happened." She told him in 3 sentences. She told him she had been lost. She told him a stranger had walked her to the painted bird stall and bought her a cup of sweetened water. She told him the Sothra had come around the corner, and the stranger had pushed her behind him, and the stranger had taken the bite. The Warlord closed his eyes for 1 heartbeat. He opened them. He spoke in Korath, low, 3 short sentences. The closest of his warriors went still in a way the human onlookers found more frightening than the beast had been. The handler in the dust did not raise his head. Velkorath put 1 massive hand under Eli's good shoulder, the other under his back, and he lifted him as if Eli weighed nothing at all. He stood, and he turned, and he began to walk. "Follow," he said in standard, over his shoulder to his daughter and to no one else. "He comes with us now." Eli felt the ground move under him, then the ground stop being the ground. Then the smell of leather and oil and cold mountain air, and then he saw nothing, and then nothing for a long time. He woke into the smell of incense and copper, and a low murmur of voices in a language he did not know. The light was golden, tent fabric, hide stretched over wooden ribs, the seams stitched with dengue, the inside of the hide painted with patterns he could not read in the dim light. He was on a cot. There was a pressure across his chest and shoulder that he understood after a long moment was a dressing thick and damp and cool. And the cool was the cool of something that was not water. He moved his hand. The hand worked. He turned his head slowly and saw an old Korath man sitting on a stool 3 paces away, tying a small clay jar shut with a leather cord. The old man did not look up. He said, in standard so dry it could have been read off a card, "You should be dead." Eli tried to speak and found he could. "Why am I not?" That said, the old man, knotting the cord, is the question every person in this camp has been asking since yesterday morning. Yesterday? You have been asleep for a day and a half. The bar rush has worked. He set the jar on a low table and finally looked at Eli. The old man's eyes were the color of dark honey, and they were not warm, but they were not unkind. VAR is the enzyme of the anthrax bite. It kills 9 of every 10 fourth it enters. It has never spared a human. It has now. Eli closed his eyes. He opened them. The tent was still there. The old man was still there. "I don't understand," he said. "You will," said the old man. "You will not enjoy understanding it. Most of us did not. I will leave you now. Someone wants to see you." He went out through the tent flap, and the flap closed behind him, and Eli was alone for the length of a breath, and then the flap opened again, and Sarah was standing in it. She was not wearing the worker's coat. She was wearing a long, dark robe of soft black wool, a circlet of woven white braid at her brow, and her white hair was loose down her back instead of plaited. Her face was a face that had not slept. She crossed the tent and knelt at the side of his cot, and she took his hand, and she did not let go. "You should have run," he said. His voice was rough. "I know. Why didn't you?" "Because you did not." She bent forward and pressed her forehead very briefly to the back of his hand. He felt the heat of her skin through his own. She straightened, and she said in a voice so low he almost missed it, "There is something I should have told you yesterday. Tell me." "My name is Sierra Koreth. I am the daughter of Valen Korth of the Coral clan of Kelvar." He did not laugh exactly. He made a sound that was the closest thing to laughter a body in his condition could make, and it hurt his chest, and he did not stop. He laughed because there was nothing to do with information that large except to laugh at it, and he laughed until the tears that came were a thing he could pretend were just from the laughing. She watched him. She did not look offended. When he could breathe again, he said, "Of course you are. I should have said, you should have. My father's going to come in now." "All right. He is not going to apologize for any of this." "All right." She did not let go of his hand when the tent flap opened. The warlord came in alone. He had to bend at the waist to clear the tent's center pole, and he did not sit because there was no chair in the tent built to hold him. He stood at the foot of Eli's cot, his amber eyes on Eli's face, his 3 braided lengths of iron-gray hair very still against his shoulder. The smell of leather and oil came in with him. "You can hear me," he said. "Yes, good. I will be brief because you are tired, and what I have to say will tire you more." Eli did not say anything to that. There seemed to be no answer that would help. Valen Koreth spoke in slow, deliberate standard. He said that the Sothrak had bitten him. He said that the bite carried the virus. He said that the VAR, by every law and every record his people had kept, since they had begun keeping records, killed most who took it. He said that those who survived were called in the old word Varara. The phrase translated badly into standard. The closest words were of true heart. It had nothing to do with virtue. It had to do with a quality of the spirit that Korath could not define, and only the Sothra could measure. He said that the Sothrak who bit a Vornara was bonded to him for life. The bond could not be broken. The animal followed. The Sothrak in the pen outside the tent, the same animal that had taken Eli's shoulder in its jaws yesterday morning, was no longer the property of any handler in any clan. It was Eli's by the law of the Sothrak, and there was nothing any human or Korath living could do about it. That was the first gift. Eli opened his mouth to say he had no place for a war beast, no money to feed it, no land to keep it on. The warlord raised one finger, and Eli's mouth closed. "It does not matter where you put it," Valen said. "It will follow you," he went on. He said that there was a second matter. By the law of his people, when a Vornkara was found defending the warlord's blood from death, the warlord owed him a debt that could not be paid in metal, in land, or in service. It could only be paid in name. The warlord stepped to the side of the cot. He looked down at Eli for a long moment, and his face, which had not moved through any of this, moved a very small amount around the eyes. He struck Eli's chest lightly, once over the heart, once over the wound. He spoke the words. By the right of the Iron Hand, the warrior Eli Vance was acknowledged from this hour as blood of the Korath clan, brother to no man living, son to Velon, free of debt to all clans of Kelvar by the Warlord's own seal. That was the second gift. The boy on the cot, who had not had a parent in 7 years and 4 months, did not have a face for what came up out of him at the words. He looked at the man at his bedside and could not see him clearly because his eyes had filled. The Warlord did not look at this. The Warlord let it happen. He looked instead at his daughter, who had not let go of Eli's hand through any of this. He looked at her for a long moment, and her chin came up, and she did not look down. There is a third matter, Bel and Careth very quietly. I will not order it. I will witness it. He spoke the law of the Vorkura. He spoke the right of the protector and the protected, who by the oldest custom of the Corinth might stand bonded by oath if both willed it. The bond was a pledge of intent, not a marriage. It could be broken only by death or by formal release. He said the words. He waited. Eli looked at Sarah. She was looking at him already. Yes, he said before he could think of any of the reasons not to. Yes, she said before he had finished saying it. The Warlord placed his palm flat across both their chests, his hand large enough to span them both, and he held it there for a long count of breath, and the room exhaled. That was the third gift. The tent flap moved before the Warlord had taken his hand back, and a young Korath messenger stepped in with the look of a man delivering news he wished he was not delivering. He spoke 3 sentences in Korath. Velon listened without expression. He nodded once. The messenger retreated. The Warlord turned his head slowly toward Eli. The frontier mandate has been informed, he said. So has the Khaziran clan. Both will be here before sundown tomorrow. You will rest until then. After that, you will not rest for some time. He left the tent without another word. Sarah stayed. The mandate arrived first. Commissioner Avery Hale was a thin, polished man in a charcoal coat, gray at the temples, with the kind of voice that had been trained to sound reasonable while saying unreasonable things. He came with 4 troopers in light-powered plate and a clipboard data pad and a stack of legal documents thicker than Eli's arm. He stood in the receiving tent at the edge of the Korath compound, and he requested in his most reasonable voice the immediate return of one Eli Vance, 16 years of age, word of the mandate, currently in the custody of foreign nationals against his legal guardian's consent. Velon Kororat was waiting for him. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. The boy is not the mandate's to claim. He said, by the law of my people, witnessed before 200 warriors in the eyes of his own kind, he is mine. If you wish to take him from me, Commissioner, you will explain to your government that you began the second human Korath war in a tent in a market on Bourne 4, and you will explain it to my warriors first. Hale, to his credit, did not flinch. I'll be filing for an emergency hearing, he said. 3 planetary cycles. I'd advise you not to leave this moon before then. I leave when I leave, Commissioner. Hale left promising paperwork. The paperwork came the next morning, and it was real, and it was thick, and handed it to a clerk in his retinue without reading it. The Khaziran came at sundown. A single rider on a track the color of wet ash, in the colors of a clan, whose banner Eli would not learn to read for another year. The rider did not enter the compound. He drove a banner spike into the ground 3 paces from the threshold, deep enough that 2 warriors had to work to pull it free after he had ridden away. The spike's pendant was a single strip of black cloth with a red triangle painted on it, and the Korath in the compound went very quiet when they saw what it was. Eli by then was sitting up. He saw the way they went quiet. He asked Sierra what it meant. She told him the Khaziran clan had called a trial of 3 tides. By their law, it was their right. The Korath did not have the standing to refuse. The trial would be held in 9 days on the salt pan east of the compound. 3 duels: blade, mount, will. To lose any one of them was to die. He asked who would fight them. She looked at him a long time before she answered. "You will," she said. He was 16. He had never held a real blade. He had never sat on a track. He did not know what it meant in the context of a core ritual. He had 9 days. He started learning that night. The dust ring behind the tents was a 40-pace circle of packed earth swept clean of rocks lit by oil lamps set on iron pikes. And Sarah took him into it the same evening she told him about the trial. She brought 2 practice blades, light and curved, the wood worn smooth at the grip from years of someone else's hands. She handed him one. She did not waste time with a stance lesson. She told him to come at her. He came to her. She put him on his back inside 2 seconds. She put him on his back 14 more times that night. She did not gloat. She did not soften. She picked him up by the wrist after each fall and reset him and showed him again the small thing he had done wrong and the small thing she had done to use it. She told him he was strong but stupid. She told him he was fast but slow to read. She told him he had a habit of looking at the blade instead of the shoulders, and the blade was the last thing to move, and the shoulders were the first. He learned to watch the shoulders. By the 3rd night he was still losing every match, but he was losing them slower. Vaska the Sooth came to him on the 4th day. She was being kept in a wide hide pen at the southern edge of the compound, and the handlers had stopped going into the pen at all, because she would not eat from any of them, and she had bitten one of them on the wrist hard enough to break the bone. Sarah walked Eli to the pen at sunrise. She told him to climb in alone. He climbed in. Vasa was lying in the far corner with her flat black head on her 3-toed forelegs, and her old gold eyes opened when she heard him drop into the dust, and she watched him cross the pen the way an old dog watches a child. He stopped 3 paces from her and held out his hand. He felt absurd. She lowered her head and pressed it against his open palm. He did not at first know what to do with this. He stood there with his hand on the broad, flat plates of her skull and felt her breathing under his fingers, the long, slow draw and release of an animal whose ribs were larger than his torso. He sat down in the dust beside her. She put her head on his thigh. He sat there for 2 hours. When he finally rose to leave, she rose with him, and she followed him out of the pen, and she followed him to the dust ring. And she lay at the edge of the ring while Sarah put him on his back another 19 times, and she did not move for any of it. And from that day, Varasa was at his side or near his side at every hour he was awake. The handler stopped trying. The nights were quieter than the days. He sat with Sierra by a brazier inside the Warlord's tent the 5th evening in, and she told him about her brothers. There had been 3 of them. Cororin, the eldest, had died at 22 in the cavalry wars at the Battle of Torx. Mithrin, the middle, had died at 19 in a border raid against a clan that no longer existed. The youngest of the 3 had been 4 years older than Sierra, and he had died 8 months ago in a duel her father had not been able to prevent. Her father had not spoken for a whole season after Theron. He had not slept indoors. He had not eaten in front of his family. The clan had thought for a little while that they had lost him with his sons. She told Eli that yesterday morning at the moment her father had placed his palm on Eli's chest. She had watched her father's face, and something had come back into it that had been gone for a long time. Eli did not know what to say to this. He told her the only thing he had to give in return. He told her about the night his parents had died. He had not told anyone since the mandate counselor at the orphan office. And he had not told her well. He told Sierra about the transport and about the message that had come at 3 all in the morning and about the way his mother's hands had been. On the first photograph, the colonial police had brought to the door. He told her in shorter sentences than he had expected because his throat kept closing. She did not tell him she was sorry. She placed her hand on his bandaged shoulder very lightly, and she left it there until he was finished. They did not kiss. They leaned their foreheads together in the lamplight. Brasa, at the tent's threshold, made a sound that was almost a sigh. Outside, the wind off the dust seas was rising, and in the morning the wind would carry the first banners of Draskazairon's column over the eastern ridge. The salt pan east of the compound was a flat white plain 10 kilometers across, the bones of an old sea ring by low red ridges that on the morning of the trial were dark with the silhouettes of warriors. 2,000 of them by Sarah's count, 1,000 from each clan. Behind them, a smaller crowd of human onlookers from the outpost, kept back by mandated troopers who were under orders not to interfere. Above them, 3 observer drones from the frontier mandate, lights blinking at their underbellies. Draskazairon himself did not take the field at the first tide. His clan's law allowed him to send his 3 best warriors for the trial of blade and the trial of mount, and to take the field himself only at the trial of will. He sat at the high seat at the eastern edge of the ring, a covered platform of dark wood, his sons and his captains in a half-ring behind him. He was older than Eli had expected, mid-50s perhaps. His skin was a deeper green than Velon's, more weathered, and his hair was iron black, not gray, cut in a single short crop. His eyes, even at 100 paces, were the color of unpolished bronze. And they did not look away from Eli for the entire morning. Eli stood at the western edge of the ring with Sarah beside him, Inassa behind him, and the long curved practice blade he had trained with for 9 days, now sheath at his hip. Velon Kororathas stood on his left. "Your hands are shaking," the warlord said quietly. "I know. Good. A man whose hands do not shake before a trial of blade is a man who does not yet understand what is in the ring with him. Let them shake. They will stop when the work begins. The work began." His first opponent was Corin Kazarin, twice his weight, 24 years old, and a head taller. He came across the ring like a man crossing a hall to claim a chair. He did not bow. He did not speak. He drew, and the drawing was the entire opening sequence. And Eli almost died in the first 3 seconds of his first real duel. He did not die because Sarah had taught him to watch the shoulders. And Karen's shoulders, when the second cut came, opened a 4-second early, and Eli was already moving before the blade came down. He lost ground 3 times. He almost lost his footing twice. The second of the 2 times he felt Corinne's blade open a cut along his right forearm, and the blood came warm and fast, and he kept moving because falling meant the trial ended, and the trial ending meant he and Sarah were done together. In the 7th exchange, Corin's left shoulder dropped a fraction before his right hand moved. Eli had been waiting for it. He stepped inside the cut. His blade went up under the heavier man's guard and across his chest. Not deep, a long shallow line from the right collarbone to the left ribs. And Corin staggered back 2 steps, and his blade came down, and he looked at the wet seam across his front, and then at Eli, and he yielded. He yielded with his palm pressed flat against his own chest, the Kororath salute for kin. The crowd did not cheer. They watched. They were measuring. Eli, breathing through his teeth, blood running down his right arm, looked across the ring and found Belen's face. The warlord nodded. Just once, Sarah was at his side before he had fully turned. She did not embrace him. She took his bleeding arm at the elbow and the wrist, and she pressed a strip of green resin cloth against the cut, and she wrapped it tight. And she did not speak. She did not need to. Her hands shook now where they had not shaken yesterday, and he knew what that meant. The second tide came after a quarter-hour rest. The Sothrak duel was different, and it was not a duel he could win with his own hands. His opponent was Hesh Kazarin, mounted on Garach, an older bullrack, older and heavier than Vasa by a clear margin. The riders steered, the animals fought. The first Sothrak to yield lost. The riders almost never died unless their mount went down. But the mounts could and did kill each other, and the mount that died took the rider's bond and the rider's name with it. Eli mounted Verasco in the middle of the ring. She had not let any other rider on her back since the day she had bitten him. She had let him climb on the morning of the 7th day of training, and she had carried him 3 slow circles around the dust ring, with her head held low and her gait careful, and she had not thrown him once. Now in the salt pan she held still while he settled into the high saddle, and her shoulders under his thighs were strong in a way that he understood as a fact of physical truth, and also as a fact of something else. The horn sounded. Garrett came across the ring like a dropped stone. He was bigger. He was older. He had been in 8 duels and won them all. Vasa braced. They met in the center of the ring with a sound that Eli felt in his teeth. The animals fought. He had been told this was not a duel he could win with his hands, and he had not understood it until the moment it began. The Sothrax moved with a savagery that made every blade he had crossed in the dust ring look like a child's game. They tore at each other's necks with the 4-pointed jaws. They drove with their hooked spurs at the soft places under the ribs. Brasa took a long cut across her left flank in the second exchange, and Eli felt her lurch under him and almost lost his seat, and she came back into the fight with a sound that was halfway between a roar and a wail. In the third exchange, Garrick pinned her. He drove her to the salt and held her there with his foreclaws braced on her shoulders, and his quarter jaws came down across her throat, and they did not close, but they would close, and the count of breaths a Sothak gave a yielding mount was 10. Eli counted the first breath, the second, the third. He did not draw his blade. He put his hand on Vasa's neck. He bent forward low, his chest against her shoulders, his mouth against the corded muscle just behind her ear. He spoke her name, her real name, the Kororath name Sarah had taught him on the 5th night, the one no human throat had ever shaped before. And he said it the way Sierra had taught him, with the breath at the right place, and the long vowel pulled across the tongue. He felt the change go through Vasa's whole body. She rose. He had not known she could rise. Garrick had been heavier. Garrick had had her pinned. Vasa rose with Garrick's full weight on her shoulders, and her head came up under his throat, and her 4-pointed jaws closed across the soft place under Garrick's jaw. And Garrick made a sound that no one in the ring had heard a Soth make before. He yielded, hesh. Kazarin slumped in his saddle, and his hands dropped from the res, and the ring stopped moving. Varasa held Garrick in the closed jaw for 2 more heartbeats, the way a South Rock held a yielded enemy when she wished to make a point, and then she released. She stepped back. She turned and she carried Eli at a slow walk toward the western edge of the ring, and her flank, where Garrick's spur had cut her, was bleeding freely, and she did not seem to feel it. The crowd this time made a sound. Velen Karath, standing at the ring's edge with his arms crossed, did not nod. He brought his closed fist to his chest and held it there, fingers against the place over his heart. And the gesture went through both clans like a current through water, because it was the salute the Warlord gave to kin, and he gave it to a 16-year-old human boy on the back of a bleeding stack in the middle of a salt pan on a moon 30 light years from the place of his birth. Sarah was at the ring's edge. He rode past her at a slow walk, and her hand reached up, and her fingers brushed his calf very briefly as Varasa passed. The third tide was waiting. Dras Kazaran rose from his high seat. He came down the steps of the platform alone. He did not bring a blade. He did not bring a banner. He walked across the salt pan in the late morning light, his shadow long behind him, his old bronze eyes fixed on Eli the entire way, and the ring closed around him as he stepped into it, because the law of the trial allowed only 2 figures inside the salt circle once the third tide began. The salt circle had been redrawn at the center of the ring in fresh white, 12 paces across. The rule was simple. There was no blade. There was no mount. There were 2 warriors. And they spoke to each other, and they pressed each other with words and presence and silence, and the weight of what they had each already done in their lives, and the first to step outside the white circle lost. To die in a trial of will was rare. To break was common. Most who broke never came back to themselves. Not entirely because the trial of will did not cut the body. It cut the part of the body that was the self. Dresk had done it 7 times. He had won 7 times. Most of his opponents had been older than Eli was now. He looked at the boy across the circle, and did not bother to hide that he was looking at a boy. "You should not be standing in this circle," he said. Eli did not answer. "You are 16 years old," Dasquo said. "You have not yet finished your growth. The blade in the first tide weighed more than the length of your forearm. The Suthrak in the second tide carried you because she was bonded to you, not because you knew how to ride. You have not earned the right to stand where you are standing." Eli's foot moved a fraction. He stopped it. He did not step out. "The bond was a charity," Dasquo said. His voice was patient. It was almost gentle. He spoke the way an old man spoke to a grandchild he wished to instruct. "Velon Korath has buried 3 sons. 3 sons, boy. Kororin at the Battle of Torvex. Mithrin at the border, there in a duel on Kelbar that I am told the Warlord still wakes in the night for. The man you call your father has been hollow for a year. You filled a place inside him because the place was open. He gave you a name because he could not bear to bury another empty cot." Eli's hands were beginning to shake. "And the girl," Drasqua said. He let the word hang. "She is 15. She is the last living blood of the Iron Hand. She will be a warlord's wife, or a warlord herself, within 10 years. She bonded to you in a tent the day after a beast tried to kill her, in the only language her father gave her to use, and she will outgrow you in 3 years, boy, and she will look at you across a hall, and she will not know why she ever said yes." Eli's mouth was dry. His foot had not moved again, but his weight had begun to shift, and he could feel the line of his balance leaning toward the edge of the white salt. Dasquo watched the weight shift. He had done this 7 times. He knew the small movements. He delivered the next words with the soft accuracy of a man placing a knife. "Your parents were killed by rebels," he said. "I am told you were 9. I am told their names were John and Miracle. I am told the route they took that morning was a mandated transport route through the Outer Rim. And I am told the rebels who put a charge on the side of that transport were paid by a sympathetic clan. The plaza, the salt pan, the sky overhead all went very far away. They were paid by a clan boy, a clan of green skin and white hair, a clan whose warlord sat in a stone room on Kevlar that morning and signed the order. I will not tell you which clan. I will tell you that the man you are now calling father has, in his very long career, sent men into the Outer Rim sector. I will tell you that the tent you sleep in tonight is a tent of the people who put your mother's hands in the photograph the police brought to the door. Sierra at the ring's edge made a sound. It came out of her without her permission, a small, broken sound. Eli heard it. Vlon beside her did not move. The trial of will did not allow help. He stood very still. His amber eyes were fixed on his son. Eli closed his eyes. He stood very still, and the salt pan went away, and the crowd went away, and the wind went away. And what remained inside the dark of his closed eyes was a kitchen on a moon called Ulderis II at 3:00 in the morning, and his mother's hands on a photograph, and the sound his father had made when he had recognized the wreck. He thought about that sound for a long time. He had not let himself think about it in 7 years. Then he thought about a green hand on his sleeve in a market plaza, and a girl's careful standard, and a beast the size of a horse coming around a corner, and a boy 16 years old who had pushed her behind him without thinking. He thought about a warlord kneeling in the dust beside him and tasting the blood from his shoulder and going still. He thought about a hand on his chest. He opened his eyes. The salt pan was still there. Drosk was still there. Drosk was watching him. and the patience on Dask's face had a small, thin line of something else through it now, because the boy across the circle had closed his eyes for 30 long seconds and had not stepped out. Eli spoke. "You are right about one thing," he said. His voice was rough. He let it be rough. "I am a boy." Drock waited. "I was a boy when the rebels killed my parents. I was a boy for 7 years in the loft, above a stable on a moon nobody wanted to live on, mocking out the stalls of pack beasts for a half-credit a day. I was a boy yesterday morning." He paused. "I became a man yesterday morning when an animal weighing as much as a horse closed her jaws across my ribs, and I chose not to fall." The line through Drast's face deepened. "You came here today," Eli said, "because you needed to break a boy. You needed to break me to prove a point about your own clan and your own line and the place of your kind in a galaxy where the law you were taught no longer holds. You came here to break me with words, because if you can break me, then the Var did not really choose me, and the Suthrak did not really bond to me, and the Warlord did not really put his hand on my chest." Draw's foot moved. He caught it. He set it back. He had not meant to move. "You came here," Eli said, "because you are afraid of what it means that I survived the bite." The silence in the salt circle was a thing with weight. "If a human can carry the Vares, then the line you have spent 50 years drawing between Korath and lesser things is a line drawn in salt. And the line is already washing away Draxarin. It is washing away in the eyes of the warriors standing at the edge of this ring of both clans who watched a human boy ride a streak through the second tide and rise from a pin no one in this generation has risen from. It is washing away in the high seats of the Federation, who are watching this trial through 3 drones over our heads. It is washing away in the tents of your own people, who are looking at me right now and seeing not a thing they were taught to despise, but a thing they were not taught to expect." He took a breath. "You did not come here today to defend your clan from my bond. You came here because you needed to see with your own eyes whether the line was really washing away. Now you know." Draw's foot moved again. It moved without his permission. The weight of his body shifted, and his shoulder turned, and his old bronze eyes lost the patience they had carried into the circle. And he reached for words, and the words were not there. He stepped out of the salt circle. He did not say he yielded. He did not have to. He turned, and he walked out of the ring, and his warriors closed around him in a ring of their own, and they led him back to the high seat without a sound. He did not look at his sons. He did not look at the captains. He sat. He stared at the salt pen in front of him and saw none of it. Eli stood alone in the white circle. He swayed once. Then he stood. Brasa came to the edge of the ring at a slow walk, her bandage flanked dark with dried blood, her old gold eyes on her rider, and Sarah came to the edge of the ring with one hand pressed flat to her own chest. And Valankra came to the edge of the ring with both hands at his sides, and the boy in the salt circle walked out of it on his own legs, and he walked to the 3 of them, and he walked to his pledged first, and to his bonded second, into his name father third, in that order. Across the ring at the eastern edge, Commissioner Avery Hale lowered the controls on his observer drone. He had the entire trial on record. He understood finally what the recording was going to show, and what the Federation was going to make of it, and what the mandated case for extraction was going to look like when it reached the emergency hearing in 3 planetary cycles. He turned. He walked back to his transport. He did not file the case. The clan hold of the Korath stood high on the eastern ridges of Kelvar, a fortress of stone and dark timber built into the cliff face, the home of the Iron Hand and the seat of the Korath line for 9 generations. 6 months after the trial of 3 tides, a young man stood on a high ledge above the clan hold's main gate, and a track the size of a small horse stood at his side, and a green-skinned girl with a single white braid leaned against his good shoulder, and the heavy red sun of Kelvar came up slowly over a horizon of stone. He was taller now, 2 fingers by Sarah's measure. The work of the clan holding training yards had drawn him longer at the spine and broader across the shoulders. And the silver arc of the bite scar that ran from his collarbone to his lower ribs had set into his skin the way old scars set. A ridge that did not hurt any more, but that he was always aware of when he turned a certain way. Sarah traced it sometimes in the dark with her thumb. He led her. He was learning the language badly. He could greet a captain of the 3rd Division without offending him, and could not yet read a children's primer without help. He was learning the law. Slowly, the Iron Hand had appointed him an old advocate of the Clanhold Court, a woman of 90 with no patience and excellent standard, who put scrolls in front of him every morning and asked him questions every evening, and who had told him 2 months in that he was a worse student than her own great-grandson, but a faster reader. Vasa slept at the foot of his cot. She growled at anyone who came too close to him, including on 3 separate occasions Valancourt himself, who had found this funny in a way Eli had only seen him once. The dawn on the high ledge was quiet. Sierra, leaning against his good shoulder, said, "You are thinking again." "I am. You think too much? You taught me to read shoulders. I have to think about something." She made a small sound that was the closest she came to laughter. He felt it through his shirt, where her cheek rested against him. He thought, not for the first time, that he had not known a person could be a place you lived in until he had lived in her. He thought about Crossroads Outpost, about the boy in the loft above the pack beast, about the half-credit a day, and the cracked gloves, and the long flat plane of dust outside the eastern dome that he had looked at every dawn for 7 years and not really seen. He thought about the morning he had carried 2 buckets of water across the central plaza and watched a black-draped wagon roll past the eastern gate. He thought about what Villon had given him, a name, a daughter, in the only sense of the word the law allowed, a beast bonded for life, a father of a kind, a scar. He thought about what he had given. He had given a stranger his back. That was all. He had given his back to a beast he had never seen before. In a market plaza on a moon, he was already sick of a girl whose name he had not yet been told. The whole long haul of his life since the trial, the bond, the title, the clan hold, all of it ran out of one small motion of the body that had taken him no longer than a heartbeat to make. Sarah asked him very quietly what he was thinking. He told her. He told her he was thinking that he had been a ghost in a place that did not want him, and one morning in the sun he stood between a beast and a girl. And that morning he had stopped being a ghost. She was silent for a long moment. "And what?" she said. "Do you think you are now?" He thought for a long time. The red sun cleared the horizon. The light caught on the silver arc of the scar at his shoulder, and on the gold strand braided new into the leather charm at her wrist, the 4th strand of a knot that no longer meant name unfinished, and on the broad flat plates of Raska's skull, where her old gold eyes had not closed since dawn. "I am where I belong," he said. Vasa, against his thigh, made a sound that was not quite a sigh. Sarah laughed. It was a small private laugh, the kind she only made for him, and she turned her face up toward his, and the warlord's voice came back to him from a tent on a moon 30 light years away. The words by the right of the Iron Hand. The warrior Eli Vance was acknowledged as the blood son of the Korth clan, and the boy who had taken a beast's jaws across his ribs to keep an alien girl alive, who had given a stranger his back without thinking, leaned down and kissed his bonded for the first time. And the high red sun of Kelbar came all the way